Hello and welcome to Henry Wheeler's Movie Reviews, and today I'm going to be ranking the worst to best James Bond films in the franchise, and I won't be including any non-Eon Productions, so Never Say Never Again and the 1967 Casino Royale aren't going to be included, but even if they were, they'd be right down towards the bottom of the list, so there isn't much point in including them anyway. And also at the end I will be doing my ranking of the worst to best Bond actors as well, so something to look forward to. So without any further ado, here we go. So number 25, we start off with the worst of the lot, Moonraker, which is a real low point in the franchise for me. I just felt like it was bordering on self-parody. You know, it's utterly ridiculous, and Bond goes to space, which, you know, I understand it happened in the novel, but with everything else going on in the film, it just feels like it jumped the shark, especially when Jaws gets a love interest in Rio. And Roger Moore's raised eyebrow iteration of Bond is at its most testing here. But we'll talk more about him later. Get it? It also has the worst pun of them all in the entire series, delivered sadly by Desmond Llewellyn.
My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
So next is the last outing for Pierce Brosnan, Die Another Day, which I remember fondly as it was my first Bond film in the cinema, but you know, that novelty seems to have worn off by this point. I don't like it. The CGI is too frequent and not advanced enough for it to age well at all. The film's really silly, but kudos to them for getting actual languages other than English spoken in the film, because far too often there will be actors who speak in English but with an accent, but here you have Korean characters speaking in Korean with each other. I enjoyed that aspect of it. It's one of the few positives. However, it was really a film too far for Brosnan. He was supposed to follow more, but there were issues with his Remington Steele contract who wouldn't let him go, and he ended up getting the role 8 years later. So, you know, if he got it then, perhaps he wouldn't have been in the role at this age. Having said all that, Toby Stephens is really chewing the scenery for all that it's worth in a great pantomime villain performance as Gustav Graves. Oh, and this was the film that introduced the world to Rosamund Pike, who's good in it. But, you know, that's the case with everything she's in, really. Also, that Madonna theme is by far the worst in the entire series. The orchestral beginning is decent, but then it just takes a nosedive off a cliff with that choppy production that just sounds dreadful. So next, we have Octopussy. Most of the film at the bottom end of this will be from Roger Moore, so just a disclaimer there. I don't really have much to say about this particularly. Yeah, the film's pretty poor, and it's not particularly involving or memorable, although the theme is okay. So next, we have Diamonds Are Forever, Sean Connery's return after the short-lived tenure of George Lazenby. It's just such a lazy film with abysmal villains that the duo who kept following him were honestly laughable. Mr. Kidd and Mr. Wint, that was it.
Hi, I'm Plenty.
But of course you are.
Plenty O'Toole.
Plenty O'Toole? Really? You know, I know they go with stupid names for the female characters, but also it wasn't really much of a spy film, but a heist film involving diamonds. And also bringing back Blofeld just felt a bit pointless. It's especially unusual since he's played by Charles Gray, who played a good guy in the Connery film that preceded this one. And Tiffany Case as well is just such an irritating character. With all that being said, it does have one of the all-time best Bond themes, and it's just a shame that it was wasted on such a rubbish film. So next is a film that many believe to be the worst of the lot, and I thought it would be for me as well, but no, it's A View to a Kill. It's not good, but Grace Jones as Mayday is a lot of fun, as is Christopher Walken playing an entertaining baddie in one of his earlier roles. Moore is clearly too old for the role though, and it really shows. I did think that I'd hate this just as soon as California Girls by the Beach Boys played in the opening sequence. I thought, oh my god, I'm gonna detest this. But it wasn't as bad as I initially anticipated. So next is another Roger Moore film, For Your Eyes Only, which, apart from the ridiculous story, had some good points to it. I did like that the BB character throws herself at Bond, but he rebuffs her advances. I hadn't seen that before, and it caught me off guard that Bond would just be like, no, you're alright.
He thinks I'm still a virgin.
Yes, well, you get your clothes on. I'll buy you an ice cream.
Plus the climbing sequence is pretty entertaining, but it's just a dull film. Even the theme is dull. It's by far the least memorable Bond theme that I've ever heard. It's just completely bland and joyless. Usually, regardless of the quality of the Bond films themselves, the themes, they're usually at least memorable, but it's not the case here at all. Also, the fact that they had someone who actually played Margaret Thatcher in the film to congratulate Bond on the work that he did, I was sick in my mouth a little bit. It really made me uncomfortable. And in addition to that, just the needless opening sequence with the comedy Blofeld gag with him being tipped down the chimney stack, eyes were rolled. So next we have Quantum of Solace, which I didn't go to see in the cinema, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't. It's just a hot mess. It's evident that the script is half-baked given the writer's strike, but it's a shame because Daniel Craig just deserves better than this. Given that he's probably my favourite Bond. Spoilers for the end. The action scenes are just atrociously edited. You can't understand what's happening at all. You think Michael Bay was in charge of this. It's so distracting, and that aspect of it alone drops the film right down the list for me. It's not particularly well made, and Gemma Arterton deserved better than this, especially with a character with a name like Strawberry Fields. I mean, come on. But at least he didn't sleep with Olga Kurylenko's character. I can't even remember her name. Also, I like Mathieu Amalric, but I just wish an actor such as himself was in a better Bond film than this. The theme is rubbish as well. So, next up is The World Is Not Enough, which has an excellent opening sequence involving the boat chase on the Thames. But then you got him falling on the hot air balloon onto what was then known as the Millennium Dome, which was in construction at that point, and is now the O2 Arena. But after that, it just becomes a slog. The Electra King reveal is really obvious, and Denise Richards as a nuclear physicist called Christmas Jones is one of the least convincing casting I've ever seen. They clearly only named her that to cram in that awful one-liner at the end.
I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
I think that might actually be the worst pun of the whole series, because they named a character to build up to that pun, which makes it even worse. On a positive note, I do like Robert Carlyle in it. The theme from Garbage is pretty good though. So next, we have The Man with the Golden Gun. We're finally back to Roger Moore films now, and I remember liking this more than I do currently. The problem is that the Scaramanga and Knick-Knack character just aren't in it enough. I really like Christopher Lee, and he's excellent in this, as is Hervé Villechaize. But when they aren't in it, it's pretty boring. It also brings back that irritating cop from Live and Let Die, Sheriff Pepper, who just happens to be on holiday in Bangkok while James is there. I thought it would just be a small cameo, but he returns after this really small scene where you see him show up. And he's in the film for what feels like 30 minutes. His character is just so tiresome. Though one particular moment in this involving him is jaw-dropping in that I honestly cannot believe that they actually did it. Did they really just edit that in? What? Why? It's just really formulaic as a Bond film. You know, there's not really much interesting going on, apart from the novelty of the third nipple, I guess, but even that. Also, the private island with the funhouse is pretty entertaining and interesting to see, I suppose. But again, the song is not really up to snuff. So now we have Thunderball, and it may surprise some people since it's highly regarded, but why is this so long? The film's fine, I guess, but Jesus, it's so tedious. And, you know, it also has a scene where Bond blatantly sexually assaults a woman, along with a clear scene of sexual coercion later on as well. So there's that. But it's just very forgettable. I guess it was the first film to introduce Blofeld, so it's important in that regard. It's just such a dull watch. Not particularly invested in it whatsoever. The scenes underwater just last way too long, but I like the theme from Tom Jones. So, next is Tomorrow Never Dies, and along with Goldeneye, these were the two Bond films that I saw the most growing up, as I owned both on VHS. I watched them religiously. I loved the remote-controlled car, which is still fantastic, and Michelle Yeoh plays a great Bond girl, and you know, very much is equal, and not just this disposable character who's killed off like Terry Hatcher was in the same film. I do like Brosnan's portrayal of Bond, but it's just a shame that he wasn't in better films. Additionally, I like the satirical take how news organisations function and technology. I thought it was very interesting, and also Jonathan Pryce's pantomime Dame performance is just deliciously entertaining to watch. He's just so maniacal and over the top, but I love it regardless. And also the Sheryl Crow theme is decent, but I'm always curious as to how it would have worked with Pulp doing the theme. Also, I just noticed that the director, Rogers Spottiswoode, has a name that sounds like a Bond character himself. So, we finally reached a Timothy Dalton Bond film with The Living Daylights. I will admit that I hadn't seen this before in the run-up to the video. I'd watched the scene with the car on ice, with the shed on top and sliding along in the cello case, but that was really all. You know, I'd never seen it in full. And I have to admit, I do really like Dalton as Bond. You know, obviously, people have made jokes at the expense of his portrayal.
Which are the less important Bond films, Lynn?
One of those Welsh ones.
You mean the Timothy Dalton ones? He didn't play it as a Welshman. He didn't say the name's Bond. Jones the Bond.
But I do really like how realistic his take on Bond is, though. He's very cut to the chase and no nonsense. He's not off fanning about getting his end away, and apparently he's considered the closest portrayal to the Ian Fleming source novels, and you know, I can see that. He walked so Craig could run. The theme is very good, and you know, I like the story. It feels a bit more genuine than some of the others. It was also interesting to see a villain that was a military leader obsessive, and that they were taken to Afghanistan, you know, a pretty non-glamorous place for Bond to go. So, because usually he's in Russia or, I don't know, Brazil or, you know, somewhere like that. It's like Bond going to Mongolia or something. It's unusual. It's a solid effort, and I'll probably watch it again at some stage, which I can't really say for some of the others. So, now we get to The Spy Loved Me, who many believe to be Moore's best outing as Bond, and I hadn't actually seen it in full before, and it is quite entertaining. Obviously, one of the real highlights is the amphibious exploring vehicle that Bond has.
Well, it's an amphibious exploring vehicle, so...
I remember as a child, there were two Bond cars that really stood out. This one and the DB5. I do also like Moore as Bond in this to an extent, and the opening sequence is pretty spectacular. I will give him that at least, with the skiing and then going off the cliff and the Union flag parachute popping out. It's good, though the series probably does have too much skiing in it, which is just dawned on me right now. His other half in the film is a Soviet agent and is very much as capable as him, much like in Tomorrow Never Dies, which is good to see. You know, it was nice seeing a woman in a Bond film who wasn't just there for Bond to slaver over, even though he does do that anyway, but you know, at least she has more about her character than just being eye candy. And Jaws is a rather menacing henchman who did return in Moonraker, but he was best in this. Though I'm not really sure how he killed those people, since he doesn't seem to actually bite them. Does he have an electric charge running through his metal teeth to shock them to death? I don't know. I suppose maybe it's just that he did hit a major artery or something, and you know, they just couldn't show on-screen violence like that back then in the 1970s, and you know, in this kind of film that children would be watching. It's probably that. The puns, though, are just intolerable in this.
Bond, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British hand up, sir.
I never like the puns. However, I can't divorce this film from that scene in I'm Alan Partridge in the James Bond episode, especially with the theme song.
No, stop getting Bond wrong!
So now, at number 12, we get to Live and Let Die, which is my favourite Roger Moore film and has one of the best themes as well by Paul McCartney and Wings. Perhaps the reason this is so high is because I do have fond memories of watching this as a child. Really, it was just this and Man with the Golden Gun, which I had seen in full as a child. Because this was really the only film of his that I'd seen multiple times. I love the blaxploitation aesthetic to it, and Yaphet Kotto is great fun as Kananga, as well as the guy with the metal claw for a hand. I really like Jane Seymour as Solitaire too. You know, I think she's a really good Bond girl, since she's a pretty constant character throughout the film. Also, I love New Orleans as a city. I had a great time when I went there. So, you know, it's nice to see it in a Bond film. Though Sheriff Pepper is perhaps the most annoying character ever. His scenes are like nails on a chalkboard, and I don't remember him being this irritating, but there you go. So next, at number 11, we have License to Kill, which is a rarity in that I hadn't seen any of it before, let alone the whole film. Nearly all my Bond viewing came from television, usually at Easter. And since this was rated 15, I guess it was never on TV, so this was my first time watching any of it, and I do really like Dalton's Bond. He's far more realistic, and I like that the film wasn't really a spy film, and it was just more of an action film with vendetta. Also, you know, the other films felt a little tame, but this one's surprisingly quite violent, with quite a bit of bloodletting. The villain, Sanchez, leaves Felix Leiter without a limb after feeding him to a shark, and then kills his wife shortly after the two of them have got married. It shows a lot of vulnerability for Bond, and I like that about it. You could see that he genuinely cared about his friend and wanted revenge for what they did to him and his wife. It was originally going to be called License Revoked, but they changed it when US test audiences said that they associated it too much with losing your driving license. Man, that would have been a good name for one of the Austin Powers films, and that is also one of my favourite bits of Bond trivia. The song is a bit forgettable, but overall, I like this film. Sanchez is a decent villain, and you've got a young Benicio del Toro as one of the henchmen, who's just fabulous. I think Bond's sidekick is also a good addition as well. You know, since a bit like Spy Love Me and Tomorrow Never Dies, she's pretty capable herself and isn't just there to be ogled at Bond. So now we're into the top 10 and getting to a lot of the films which I saw as a child, and perhaps I'm biased as I have fond memories of watching some of these films growing up, this one in particular, which is You Only Live Twice. And it was an interesting concept, as Bond dies in the beginning. You see him in Asia also for the first time, if Istanbul doesn't count since Bond visits Japan. Obviously, Aki, who's one of my absolute favourite Bond girls, and Tetsuro Tamba is Bond's contact in Japan. And you also get a great lair along with Blofeld being finally revealed. That theme is great as well, which was famously sampled by Robbie Williams. It's an important milestone in the franchise, and maybe it's not a great film, probably after multiple viewings, License to Kill may leapfrog it, but it is a lot of fun. Though Bond trying to pass as Japanese was just laughable in poor taste. I was also really sad when Aki was dispatched through one of the best methods of killing that I think I've ever seen in a Bond film. It was a rarity with a Bond girl that I cared about it when they were killed. She felt more three-dimensional than the others who preceded her. The film's flawed, obviously, but it's riotous fun, and it was also my first introduction to Japan through film, and for that I appreciate its existence. So now at number 9, we move on to where it all started, Dr. No. This is frequently cited as one of the best in the franchise, but I can't really say I agree. It really feels more like the franchise is just finding its feet, and the best was yet to come. The film's almost entirely set and filmed in Jamaica, which is fine, but typically in Bond you're used to vistas from different locations and the jet setting, which is absent here. It can be a bit of a slog sometimes, but it does introduce that brilliant Monty Norman theme for the first time, which remains one of the most iconic pieces of music ever written. It still sounds spectacular today, and it just oozes cool and sophistication. There's also that first introduction of Bond, which is very memorable.
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Just one of the coolest introductions of a character I've ever seen, and Sean Connery was very good in the role, but it's just a shame about the misogyny that seeps out of his depiction, just like a bad smell, but I suppose it wouldn't rear its head until later on in the franchise. Also, Dr. No isn't a particularly interesting villain, and it's obviously a bit problematic that a white actor is playing a Chinese character. And it's also strange how everyone in Jamaica has a US accent, presumably so the audience can understand them. It's just a weird creative decision. Those characters are as Jamaican as Connery's character in The Untouchables was Irish.
If you open the ball on these people, Mr. Nash, you must be prepared to go all the way.
But in any case, it's a good opening chapter to things that would improve from here. So I'm probably going to lose a lot of credibility here with the next placement. Number 8 is Spectre. I don't really understand the animosity to this film particularly. The only real bum notes are the forgettable theme song and the pretty ridiculous ending, which is quite preposterous. But regardless, it was nice to see a Bond film with gadgets again, as well as a nice lair that, you know, while not on an island, it was in the arse end of nowhere. The jokes are good, the action's fun, and the pre-title sequence at the Day of the Dead parade in Mexico City is just one of the highlights of the entire franchise. Is it a great film though? No, but, you know, it's not a bad one either. And it's also got one of the best jokes in a Bond film with that final exchange between M and C, which, you know, I remember watching it at the cinema at the time. It took the roof off. And Dave Bautista plays a menacing mute henchman pretty well. And I like Lea Seydoux in everything, especially that silver dress. Christoph Waltz is just very underused though, and it's really criminal, but I wish that they had written his character a bit better, since the reveal doesn't really make a lot of sense, but regardless, he milks his time on screen for all it's worth and makes a really charismatic villain, as he's proven before. Monica Bellucci's involvement is really more of a cameo than anything else, but I'd like to have seen more of her as well. But I just wish that they'd gone with the original theme for the film by Radiohead, which is far superior than the one that was actually chosen, and actually works really well with the title sequence. There's a video on YouTube where it's cut together and it looks great. But they really dropped the ball there. Too melancholic. It's Radiohead, what did you expect? So now, at number 7, we get to the first properly good Sean Connery outing, although admittedly there were only 2 of them, From Russia with Love. The story is one of the best in the whole franchise. It's just a blast to watch. The gadgets are fun. Got to love Kleb with her tow knife.
Oh, but
nuts, though. That's bleeding. I need some trash to plug up the cut.
And I've seen this more frequently than some others in the franchise growing up. And, you know, I remember enjoying it as a child, and it does hold up. It's rather amusing, though, that Bond has a girlfriend in this one, Sylvia Trench from Dr. No. And the idea of him, especially during this era of having a partner, is utterly preposterous. Though Robert Shaw is great in it, and I like how the pre-title sequence involves someone who you think is Bond being killed on a mission, only for it to be revealed that it's actually a training exercise and the man's wearing a mask. The theme song is great as well. You know, Matt Monro has got a terrific voice, and I could listen to him all day, even though instrumental version of the song plays during the title sequence. But it's just a really great spy film that's eminently watchable and still really, really entertaining. Now, at number 6, we make it onto the final Brosnan film in this list, and the first of his in the series, Goldeneye. I had a VHS copy of this growing up, so I watched it quite frequently. You know, I used to love Pierce Brosnan as Bond, and I still do to an extent. I think he was poorly served with largely mediocre scripts. If all his outings were comparable to Goldeneye, he'd be remembered more fondly. It's a good story. The villains are great, both Famke Janssen and Sean Bean, who, keeping up tradition, dies not once but twice in this film. The action is thrilling also, with that great tank chase in St. Petersburg. It's just a really, really good action film that still works. It is silly and at the times just utterly ridiculous, but you do have to love Alan Cumming as Boris.
I am invincible!
And it also introduces Judi Dench as M, and with that has one of the best quotes of the entire franchise.
I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War, whose boyish charms, though wasted on me, obviously appeal to that young woman I sent out to evaluate you.
Point taken.
So now we get to Connery's best in the series, which isn't really up for discussion. It's Goldfinger. This is one of the few Bond films that's commonly in the conversation among the best films ever made, or certainly British films at the very least. It's got a great screenplay with exciting characters, and particularly the villains. It's just incredibly iconic with, you've got Oddjob, you've got the gold-painted woman, the fabulous DB5, which I'm sure most boys wanted to own, and I certainly did with a small toy version of it as a child. And you've also got that fabulous laser scene with those immortal lines.
Do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Which was brilliantly parodied in that Simpsons episode. It's also got arguably the best song in the entire franchise in Shirley Bassey's Goldfinger, which still slaps like there is no tomorrow. There are obviously horrendously problematic things in it, such as Bond forcing himself on a woman who's a lesbian and trying to convince her. There's also so much casual misogyny located throughout. And we have a scene where Bond slashes a woman's tyres to run her off the road, and then comes to her aid to offer help.
You don't look like the sort of girl who should be ditched.
Never mind that. Please take me to the nearest garage.
By the way, my name is Bond.
As quickly as possible.
I understand that he's supposed to be a cold-blooded killer, but it's played off like his behaviour is admirable. It does have its setbacks in terms of the treatment of women, but the rest of the film overshadows these blemishes somewhat, and ultimately, I don't have a problem with the character being portrayed like this, but it's just the way the film glorifies it. That's really what irks me. But nonetheless, it still remains a great piece of 60s British cinema, and Connery is at his best as Bond. So number 4, I've given a lot of thought about this, and it may move up the list on multiple viewings, we'll see, but it is No Time to Die. I just had a brilliant time watching it. It reminded me of just how great the following film in the ranking is, which we'll get to just shortly. If you want to see my full review of this though, you check that out on the channel. So at number 3 is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which No Time to Die borrows quite a few elements. I mean, that's probably why I like it as much as I do. Lazenby was really the progenitor of Dalton's iteration of the character. He gets married, for fuck's sake. He brought a far more multi-layered and vulnerable version of the character that would soon become the template for Daniel Craig. The music is also John Barry's best in the whole series. The score is just excellent, and the theme is one of the best pieces of music out there, along with Louis Armstrong's beautiful We Have All the Time in the World, which, given how the film ends, is a really bittersweet tune to listen to.
It's all right. It's quite all right, really. She's having a rest. There's no hurry, you see. We have all the time in the world.
I thought that the way the story unfolded was very intriguing, and we also get, along with an obligatory ski chase, a bobsled chase too. Dame Diana Rigg is the best Bond girl, and I don't really care what anyone says. She's excellent as Tracy, and just how her character is introduced into the story is somewhat unusual. It was directed by Peter R. Hunt, who was the editor for the previous Bond films, and it shows the action in this looks great and employs a more realistic take on Bond and the way that his character is portrayed. But, you know, it's a shame that he was only there for one film, as he really works as Bond, and his RP accent is pretty good. You know, I assumed he wasn't dubbed over. I just really love this film. It's the best Bond film of the 20th century, and it really should be appreciated more than it is, though kind of has had a critical reevaluation in recent years, and you can see the influence that it's had on the like of Chris... And you can see the influence that it's had on the likes of Chris Nolan too, with Inception. It took 10 minutes, but I finally got it out. So now I have a moustache. So at number 2 is Skyfall, and this was a big deal. It was coming off the 50th anniversary of the franchise, so they really needed something important. And boy, did they deliver. Not only is the writing great, but they managed to wangle Sam Mendes, yeah, the man who made American Beauty, to direct it. It was just hugely surprising at the time, since a director of his caliber had never helmed a Bond film before, and he really did pull it off. It looks spectacular. Roger Deakins' photography is impeccable. It just looks magnificent. He also managed to bring along Thomas Newman with him to do the score, his frequent collaborator, and that too is executed wonderfully. And we also have Adele delivering easily top 3 Bond films of all time. It's quintessentially Bond, and I love it. Also, it's got one of the best opening sequences in a Bond film. I mean, you can say that for 4 out of 5 of the Bond films which Craig starred. It's spectacular, and Sam Mendes has a real knack for set pieces, and there are some great ones here. We're also finally introduced to the Moneypenny character, and it's refreshing for there to be no sexual pursuit from either her or Bond, as that was an aspect about the previous films which really annoyed me. They kind of played with it a bit when Samantha Bond played the role, where she was constantly rebuffing his advances, as opposed to the other way around, really, from the previous iterations of the character.
You know, this sort of behaviour could qualify as sexual harassment.
What's the penalty for that?
Someday you have to make good on your innuendos.
Because the original role was just a complete simp. And I wish they had had a bit more agency than just fawning over Bond all the time like a schoolgirl with a crush. It was just infantilizing. I also really enjoyed the exploration of Bond's relationship with M, which in this film is really expanded, and she plays more of an important role than before, as she's essentially a Bond girl in the film. And I really loved the mother-son dynamic, which presumably due to him being an orphan, she would have had somewhat of a matriarchal presence for him growing up. This is explored in a way with the villain, Raul Silva, played wonderfully by Javier Bardem, a cyber terrorist who used to work for MI6, which you can see being blown to bits in another great set piece in this film. He has a real vendetta with M due to being abandoned in a deal with the Chinese authorities. There he was tortured for months and then bit into a cyanide pill to kill himself, only for it to backfire and leave him horribly disfigured. And I really like the cat and mouse element of the story between Bond and Silva. You know, it was really compelling. There was obvious comparisons to Batman and Joker in The Dark Knight, which is a better film, but you know, there's certainly a lot more history here in the character development. There is that excellent scene with that one shot of Silva delivering his opening speech, just laying his cards on the table, and that homoerotic moment between him and Bond, which is one of the best moments in the franchise.
Well, first time for everything. What makes you think this is my first time? Oh, Mr. Bond.
It's also great to see the classic DB5 back in action, and seeing some vistas from the west coast of Scotland in Glencoe. I also enjoyed the reintroduction of Q, and the jokes surrounding gadgets in an era where gadgets of yore are considered pretty obsolete. It was really entertaining. And you also have that notion of Bond being dead, returning from the grave, which was kind of explored in You Only Live Twice. He scuttles off and doesn't really return until his country needs him, which, given he's been out of action for a while, needs to start training again. And I really like that sequence of him just like getting back on the horse. It was intriguing to see this kind of more rusty aspect of his character. Apart from being a great Bond film, it's just a great film, and one which was a very fitting way to celebrate the 50th anniversary of one of the most important and beloved franchises in cinema history. So now, number one is where it all began. A little character called James Bond formed in a casino in Estoril, Casino Royale. I'm unsure why it took so long for this story to be adapted into an Eon film, because obviously there was the 1967 version, which we're not going to talk about. But it's a great story which has been tweaked a little to update it, and it takes quite a while to actually get to the casino in Montenegro, and I just love the pacing of this film, from the beginning where you see Bond getting his 00 license and that excellent parkour chase in Madagascar. But that chase scene is brilliant because Austin Powers had really illustrated how stupid the Bond films had become.
This is my Italian confidential secretary. Her name is Alata. Alata for China.
Come again?
Especially during the Moore era. And what with the James Bond series, Bond really needed a reboot and a new look. In comes Daniel Craig, who was unfancied at the time. Everyone said he was wrong for the role, and you can't have a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Bond. But, they're eating their words now. That sequence really showed the physicality that Craig brought to the role, and showed that Bond can actually get hurt, both physically and emotionally, as you see later on in the film. Le Chiffre is a great villain, especially since you can see that he's flawed himself. He's under a lot of pressure, and Mads Mikkelsen is brilliant in the role. Him and Craig play off each other very well, particularly in the scenes at the poker table, which are just some of the best bits in the film. Like, I really love the eye contact between the two of them. It's magnificent. They feel like set pieces in their own right. And that torture scene also, it's really entertaining, and the humour cuts right through.
Now the whole world's gonna know that you don't scratch your fucking balls.
Eva Green is arguably the best Bond girl also. It's really between her and Dame Diana Rigg, who just realised the last time that I saw her was in Extras with Daniel Radcliffe flinging a condom on her head. Vesper Lind is a really layered character with baggage, and Eva Green really displays this beautifully. The scene where she sat in the shower, where Bond sits with her for comfort, it's just really brilliant, where she says, I can't get the blood off my hands. It's the first time that you really feel the spectre of, that wasn't deliberate, of the toll that this line of work can bring to those around you. It's just a great scene, and there's so many of them throughout. The writing from Robert Wade, Neil Purvis, and Paul Haggis, of all people, it's just brilliant. It's very measured and well thought out, and the direction from Martin Campbell, who helmed Goldeneye, is fantastic. He really gets the best out of everyone, and the set pieces look spectacular. The score also from David Arnold is probably his best work too, along with the theme from Chris Cornell, and the title credits are maybe the first Bond film to not actually feature the silhouettes of naked or half-naked women. You can also feel a real change in how Bond is portrayed. In previous films, if he wanted information, he would sleep with someone and then maybe spend the weekend with them after, really drag it out. But not Craig's Bond. Like, there's a scene where he seduces a woman and they're kissing, but before they have sex, he gets information that he needs, and then he just leaves. He doesn't stay to get his jollies off. He's determined to do his job professionally, and I like that, since it's actually believable. You know, in the early films, as a character, they're certainly interesting, but as a secret agent, they're rubbish and terribly unreliable.
I'm just up here at Oxford, brushing up on a little Danish.
You always were a cunning linguist, James.
But that isn't something you can say about Craig's portrayal. You can see him earning his stripes in this role too, which I like, as he isn't the person that he would become because he's just starting out. The relationship between him and Vesper is great too. It feels genuine. There are parallels one can draw between this and On Her Majesty's Secret Service, as they both involve Bond falling in love and those women meeting their demise, though in this case it's more conflicted, as she had just betrayed him when that happens. But she did genuinely care for him, and even in the helped him in that scene to defibrillate his heart after his drink was spiked, which is again another great scene. It's just a great action film and one of the best ever made. Also the best that Bond has to offer, I think. I remember seeing it when it came out and it still holds up on repeat viewing. A real cut above. The camera stopped filming, so I'm recording this roughly here later. So my final rankings for the James Bond actors are number 6, Roger Moore. Number 5, George Lazenby. Number 4, Pierce Brosnan. Don't know why the fuck I'm doing the actor voices. Number 3, Timothy Dalton. Number 2, Sean Connery. And of course, number 1, who could it be? It is of course Daniel Craig. So those were my thoughts on the Bond franchise, more or less. Let me know your thoughts on Bond, just in general, or what you thought of the video, because I do enjoy constructive feedback, or just who you think the next actor to portray Bond will be. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. You can also follow me on Letterboxd over there. See you all very soon. Bye 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 bye. As a little bonus, I'll tell you what I think of the other two non-Eon ones. Casino Royale, well, it's not very funny, is it? The Woody Allen cameo is kind of weird as Jimmy Bond.
You're crazy. You are absolutely crazy.
They called Einstein crazy.
That's not true. No one ever called Einstein crazy.
Well, they would have if he carried on like this.
And Never Say Never Again. Never again.